Hey everybody, Oscar D. Grouch here with another video um, from my 9+ year Minecraft world build. I have been building in this single world with a few exceptions, but mostly in this single world for over 9 years. And today I wanted to talk about um, part of the build of the world that I'm probably most proud of, and that is this World Trade Center complex that I built after I visited Manhattan in 2016 and visited the 9/11 Memorial, saw the new One World Trade Center or Freedom Tower in person. Was very powerful experience, and I was excited to come back and get to work on trying to recreate that. This entire island, my variation of Manhattan Island, is all built flat on water, which is really convenient for laying out streets and a grid and all of that. Um, and all of the building pieces are above ground, above the water. So One World Trade Center, the North Tower, the South Tower of the original World Trade Center, the Sphere piece of art that survived 9/11 and has made its triumphant return to the World Trade Center complex site. I wanted to add a reflecting pool um, to represent the actual memorial for the 9/11 victims, which was really powerful to see in real life. And this has the same footprint as one of my towers. These are built on 17 by 17 footprints, so not super big, and they do sacrifice some of the fine detail for being so skinny. But when you build on PlayStation, there is a pretty a definite height limit. And so I've always sort of built in a scale similar to this, sometimes without even really meaning to, because if I went for like a one-on-one or a one-to-one representation, then the base would of course be a lot bigger around than this, but the ceiling, the limit of height on PlayStation I'd bump up against that and probably not be able to finish the building. So to give it decent proportions, things end up being skinny, super tall and skinny, and you lose some of the fine detail. But everything that I build tends to have a similar proportion, so it all ends up looking decent. At least in my opinion. I hope it does. And then the last thing is the Oculus, the Transportation Hub, which I don't think had been opened in 2016 when I visited, but it had been completed. It just wasn't opened yet. And yeah, I've gone back and looked at pictures of this since, and I think in the context of the World Trade Center, people could probably say, "Oh, hey, that's supposed to be the Oculus, right?" But I ended up definitely taking some liberties because it was challenging to figure out the wings and everything. And I definitely think mine looks like some sort of big um, bird or some sort of mythical creature. One of the hardest parts about this, and one of the ideas that I sort of gave up on while I was building it, was these wings. They are asymmetrical in the actual building. So whereas the one is much longer in the front and the wings get smaller in the back, then on the opposite side they're much longer in the back and they get smaller in the front. Well, I tried that, and with the way the front of my roof descends like this, I worked on it and I redid it and I redid it again and again because I just couldn't get it quite right. It always looked kind of goofy. And I'm not saying that this doesn't look goofy, but eventually I went for symmetry just for ease of getting it done, of completing it. And like I said, this whole island is built on water. So right here, this area where I'm standing is 1 block above the water level. But I knew, having read about it, having talked to people that um, visited the World Trade Center both before and after 9/11, that there was a vast underground complex of shops and stores and ways to connect to transportation to get from place to place underground. So I wanted to include that as well in my World Trade Center complex. So basically everything from this point down initially was underwater. And so it took a it took a lot of time, and it was very redundant and repetitive to reclaim all of this from the water by, of course, filling in and then knocking out all of the blocks that I had filled in. And I always like to use glowstone for that because it's very easy to see where it starts and where it stops. So anyway, that was probably the single most tedious piece of all of this, was building this underground plaza. But I'm really pleased with how it turned out. And each of the towers, there's one World Trade Center, and the North and South Towers each have their own elevator entrance down here in the plaza. There's a subway line that connects to the mainland, or in this case, I suppose it might be New Jersey. God forbid, my original PS3 map. But, so that connects over here, and you can either take the stairs and go upstairs and get into the buildings from there, or you can find the appropriate elevator for the building that you need to get into and ride up that way. One World Trade Center. This would be a representation of a newspaper stand in the plaza. There's some shoe shine chairs around. So little bits of little touches of commerce in this space. But you want to work, you go to work in the Freedom Tower, and so you get in the elevator and you ride up and up and up, and you want to go all the way to the roof, say, and so you keep riding and you ride and you ride. And while I don't furnish the interiors very often, it is important to me that the buildings end up with some interior structures, some interior lighting. So in a lot of these buildings, these super tall buildings that I built, there's an elevator core and then just floors, empty floors. But I think it gives the building a more realistic appearance, especially if it's lit from the inside and it's visible from the outside. I think I've seen some amazing buildings that are just shells, and that's okay. But to me, it just adds a little bit more realism if there's some sort of structure inside. So we are now on the roof of the Freedom Tower with all of the accoutrements and the massive antenna that sticks up to get the building to its symbolic 1776 feet of height. So there's the One World Trade Center and the original World Trade Center buildings, the towers. The north one had all of the antenna and the communication stuff on top, and the south tower had an observation platform. So those are also included in these buildings. Like I said, the footprint of these is not super big, and the basic structures of them went up pretty fast. So this is 4 rectangles here and 4 rectangles there, and I started with that. And when I'm building a tall building, I always like to leave one side of it open, so I can easily get in and put in the floors and put in whatever interior I want to put in. And then I finish it up. I actually started with the One World Trade Center because I was most concerned about the structure, and I had to watch quite a few YouTube tutorials and read some articles and stuff before I could, and a lot of trial and error before I figured out how to get this just so. Um, excuse me. While it was still a challenge to figure out the best shape of my triangles, once I got one done and it looked pretty good, it was not that difficult to recreate it on the four sides, so front and back, left and right, and then filling that in, figuring out where the floors would be, filling in the triangles with glass. That was not too challenging. But what took me quite a while to figure out was the non-flat sides. They go up so far, and then as this part gets wider, they actually get shallower. So there was a lot of trial and error to that, and I would get pretty far along in the process, and then fly back, turn around, take a look at what I'd done, and be like, oh man, that just doesn't look right. But eventually, I just chipped away at it, tried to remember the parts that I thought did look right, and not mess with those. Anytime I'm working on something that has some fairly complicated symmetry, so like this complicated thing has to look exactly like that complicated thing on the other side, I can lose my place. I have to do a little flying around to check out and see where I've been and make sure I'm doing it okay. Um, the base of the One World Trade Center is, of course, like a fortified type of bomb shelter superstructure thing on the real building, and so I wanted to make sure and include that on my build. And I know it's sort of controversial. Doesn't look it doesn't look nearly as sleek and regal as the glass tower that's on top of it, but I actually think it looks pretty cool and is a nice solid base for the building. So and I worked on that. It took me a little while to get these notches on the side, because the base isn't just four rectangles. It actually sort of mirrors the structure on top and comes together, comes in more like a triangular shape. So anyway, finally figured all of that out, got that building done, then did the north and south towers, did the memorial pool, and then did the Oculus last. Added a little park here to have some green space. It was important to me that this version of Manhattan Island be full of green, and went through a phase that where a lot of my buildings actually had trees and stuff growing off of the roofs. Had a lot of roofs that were filled with green space, and then of course eventually went along, and all of this was just flat and empty blocks of dirt when I first started. I went back and planted a ton of trees, and of course have added a lot more buildings and structures, some familiar and some completely made up as time has gone on. But where it all started for me was right here with the World Trade Center complex. And it's just a representation. I've been super impressed with some of the one-to-one ratio builds that I've seen. But like I said, the ceiling on PlayStation is a little bit lower, I think, than on computer. So doing it in this scale enabled me to get the proportions pretty decent, get the height, finish up the roof. When you're up close, especially to the north and south tower, that fine, the shell, the metal, the structure that went, the vertical bars that went up the whole building to help give it its structure, from a distance almost end up looking like mesh or something. And of course, my buildings don't have that because they're only 17 by 17. But I think they're still recognizable, and I'm pretty pleased with the way they turned out. And my Oculus, it's a little goofy looking, leaves a little something to be desired, but you know, it was a lot of fun. And it was a nice puzzle to try to figure out how to put all that together. Um, so anyway, that's what I wanted to share with you today. Um, if you want to receive notifications of any future videos, please click to subscribe. And if you see something that strikes your fancy as I'm flying around and you want to see more about it, just leave me a comment and I'll see what I can do. Okay, thanks everybody. Goodbye.